I appreciate folks being here today for the final session in our year-long session for leadership exploration. Today we're doing what I describe as the rubber meets the road session. I've talked a lot about theory and possible approaches to leadership so far. And today we'll be talking a bit about how we operationalize that, so getting out of the theory space a little bit. So it's an exciting session, and I appreciate folks for being here as we discuss it. So for our folks joining us online, we do have Edgar Monroy joining us in the digital space right now, and he can assist us with any digital questions and making sure that the audio and video are coming through well. And thanks for folks for joining us in the room as well today. I am Jesse Singleton. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Support. I'm the person who's been presenting these workshops so far, and I appreciate folks who are participating. So I thought it'd be helpful to, as we do each of these sessions, start with just a brief recap of what has come before and how does that determine where we're going next. And so if you've been through all three of our sessions, or if you've watched them on our recordings that are posted online, this is kind of what we've covered. And so in brief, in the first session, we talked about trace-based leadership and the style approach to leadership, which are very early theories to leadership that we mostly spent some time debunking. They're also some of the most common cited for folks that don't closely analyze leadership practices, right? The idea that someone's born leader or their traits dictate whether they can be a leader. And so we spent some time kind of deconstructing that and looking towards more productive styles of leadership. That led us to session 2, where we talked about contingency theory, situational theory, and path goal theory. Three separate ways that you can approach leadership to give you a framework for more productive styles of leadership. And kind of walked through those and took some assessments. These are all theories that kind of look at the situation and then dictate how you respond as a leader, with the idea that anyone can practice these. And so some really good stuff there, and potentially something that may have rang true for you as a future leader or a current leader. How can you apply your leadership? And so that was our next phase. In our most recent session, we talked about relational style of leaderships, looking specifically at leader-member exchange theory and transformational theory, two approaches that look more about how the leader presents themselves and how they build relationships with their followers to dictate how they lead. Those can be a little more philosophical than the situational contingency and path goal type theories. And sometimes it's helpful to have one in each category, right? And so we had some intro work on those to build a framework. And so if you think about our trajectory in the leadership series, we talked about first, what is a non-productive way to think about leadership and to approach it and to define it. And then we moved into two kind of ways that are more productive. One in a more functional sense and one in a more philosophical sense for theories. And that leads us to today, where we'll talk a bit about how we move forward from there and actually develop your leadership philosophy. And as we move through our session today, I'd like to spend a good chunk of our time actually working on, with the attendees, what is your leadership philosophy based on everything we talked about so far, or if you've watched our recordings, what you've kind of reflected on. And all of our sessions have had a consistent theme of reflecting on these 4 questions that build upon one another, and we will reflect on them as well today. That helps frame our thoughts and approach to leadership. First, thinking, how do we describe leadership? How do we really closely examine this? If someone asks us to describe it, what words do we use? What traits do we use to describe it? How are we putting that in words? And then transitioning to how we describe ourselves as leaders. So really being reflective in those moments and saying, this is how I describe leadership, but how do I describe myself in those moments? And am I matching up with that? So essentially reflecting on, do I see myself as a leader? Because if I'm describing leadership one way and describing myself as a leader in another way, there's some dissonance there. So how do we bring those things in line? Moving to the interview question of how do you lead, which is a central focus of these seminars, which is getting you to the point where you feel comfortable practicing leadership and having a great response in an interview of how you actually lead. And so how you answer that question, how do you lead? And then finally, how you actually lead. Rubber meets the road in a leadership situation. How are you practicing the philosophy you put together by describing it, describing yourself, answering the interview question, and then actually interacting with your peers. And so these 4 questions will actually frame the conversation a bit later, where we actually work on our own leadership philosophy. The expectation is that you leave today with, a fully formed here it is, I'm done leadership philosophy, but you leave with something tangible that you can build on and actually create both the interview question and response and also give you a framework for how you will move into potentially your next leadership situation that you're engaged in. So that's the goal for today. Well, these are the goals, but that's the objectives we're working through. So we're going to talk about our discussion moving from theory to practice today. We're going to talk about how leadership differs depending on the level of what you're leading. We're going to discuss briefly the importance of followership, which we haven't focused a lot on during our sessions. And then we're going to work on crafting that personal philosophy of leadership as a team. So the first thing is we're kind of deconstructing this is looking at formal leadership versus informal leadership, right? We've talked about different theories and ways you can approach it, but there's actually two very distinct branches when you are talking about how you interact with leadership situations, right? Your formal leadership is what you're probably most used to in defining leadership. That's something that where your leadership is derived from a formal title or the organizational structure, right? You're the boss, you're in charge, right? You're given that responsibility, you have people to report to you, they have an obligation to work with you based on the task at hand, right? You have direct recognized authority for your subordinates, right? And so you dictate how work gets done, what job assignments folks receive, and then also provide feedback on performance. You exercise delegation, and so you're determining from the tasks available, who's doing what moves from your plate if you're overburdened and you need to have assistance, who are you having elevating through that process so they're getting some leadership experience. You have ownership over the decision-making process, right? At the end of the day, even though there may be conversations amongst your team about how something gets done, you're the decision maker. Now, how much feedback you get and how much you weigh your subordinates and your followers' opinion in that process can vary a lot. You can take a lot of their feedback, you can take none of their feedback, but at the end of the day, you're making the decision, even if you're listening to their feedback. Informal leadership is a bit different. And so informal leadership is derived from knowledge, longevity, aptitude, relationships. It's a situation where you're in a peer group, but you are seen as the leader. So it's something that followership is given to you. You've earned it in some way. They look to you as the person that has been here a long time, knows a lot about something, is just a really strong worker in that area. So that aptitude piece, right? So they want to emulate your ability, or you've done a lot of really good relationship building that folks naturally gravitate and put you as like, yep, this is the person that we're standing behind, right? And those can be some really, really powerful leadership scenarios. You can have a lot of the knowledge, longevity, aptitude, relationships in the formal leadership, but that isn't necessarily what makes you the leader. What makes you the leader is the job title, right? And then how you practice that may change. Other aspects of informal leadership is that in contrast to formal, you have indirect observed authority for subordinates, quote unquote, right? You can't directly give a performance eval or assign tasks. It is something where it has to be mutually accepted that you're doing that. If you're giving feedback to assist someone in their professional growth, right? That's more collegial conversation. Or as you're dividing up work responsibilities and deciding how the team will approach a task, they've given you that authority, right? It's not vested in you through your organizational structure. This one utilizes influence rather than delegation, right? You still may delegate, but you're actually using influence to get there, right? Having the conversation and discussing who's going to do what and helping push a conversation in a positive way so that the work gets done. And so utilizing that influence to get there. And it is a consensus building process for decision making. Even if you're seen as the most senior person, the most knowledgeable, the strongest individual in that given scenario, it is still, you have to build consensus to move to action. You can't just dictate and say, you know what, conversation is over at this point, we need to move to a resolution and this is how we're doing it. It doesn't work in an informal setting. You have to build your coalition to get there. And so if you think about your own leadership experiences, you may have some very formal leadership experiences and some very informal leadership experiences. And they also may bleed in the lines, right? You may have situations where you have a formal title, but the participation of everyone involved is voluntary. And so that way you're straddling the line between formal and informal leadership, because you may have the official title of the person in charge, but everyone's volunteering. And if you push too hard on the delegation, the decision-making, the direct oversight, they can walk away. And so you have to utilize the influence and the knowledge base to have the consent of the governed, so to speak, to make that work, right? And so there's some real tangible differences there. That really can impact how we lead and really should direct how we lead, right? I would argue that there are definitely some aspects from informal leadership that are much stronger as far as like the consensus building and the relationship building and the use of, you know, personal knowledge and things like that to make yourself the leader that can be carried over and transition to formal leadership. I'm sure if we all think about it, we reflect, we can think of that formal leader who has the job title that's not a very good leader, right? And you just have to play along, and that doesn't usually go well. So if you transition some of the tangible, strong skills from informal leadership to formal, you're a better overall leader in those categories, right? It doesn't always go the same way though. So it's hard to take a lot of the practices from formal leadership and then apply them to informal and then be successful, right? Being dictatorial and delegating doesn't work in an informal setting, but consensus building can work in the formal. So it's sometimes a one-way transfer, and we have to consider that for ourselves. And I've used this in my conversations with students over my time supervising them about how they develop through their student leadership positions and their student employment positions. They've been with me for a year, 2 years, 3 years, about how they develop as leaders. And this also works in the professional setting. There are varying levels to how you lead. The first most common one I describe as in the room, right? That is leading among your peers. This is one of the most informal session, right? And so if you're in a group, maybe let's say you're in a lecture hall and you're consistently being the one that is volunteering information, moving group discussion forward, right? You're leading in the room, right? And so you're starting to emerge as that leader, but you don't have a formal role. This is also maybe if you're in a situation at work where you're the #1 follower, right? You don't have a formal position of leadership, but you're always assisting and trying to move the group towards its goals, right? This is often how you establish some informal leadership, is through the leading in the room. So you're in amongst the peers. In that scenario, we use the room as a scenario, there's the person who's at the front of the room, right? This is the person that is traditionally leading and facilitating, right? Answering questions, delegating responsibilities, making decisions in a situation. This is what you think of in the most traditional sense for leadership, right? Often we transition from in the room amongst our peers and kind of emerging from that to the person at the front of the room. You think of a professional context, this is being hired into an organization and then working your way up and being promoted to the person who's in charge of a unit or a division, right? You've moved from in the room to you're at the front of the room. What is not discussed as often is, to me, the final step in the leadership process, and that is leading from the back of the room. This is the process of cultivating other leaders, right? This is where you move from the person who's standing at the front, facilitating, guiding, answering questions, making decisions, to the person at the back of the room, observing the peers and who's emerging, and the person at the front who's facilitating the conversation, right? This is how you train others to be your successor, the next leader, right? As you move on in your journey, someone has to fill some spaces. And so you're developing other individuals. And so it's a bit different. There's situations when you are leading at the back of the room where you have someone who's emerging as a leader and they may be making a couple mistakes, and you have to give them the space to make mistakes, because it's okay to make a few mistakes. You have to make the decision of how hard do you let someone fall? What kind of safety net do you provide? Because without some falls, there's not a lot of learning and growth that takes place. And so if you insulate a new leader from all of the potential pitfalls, save them before they fall every single time, they will never lead effectively, they will never grow. And then when you leave, they're gonna have a really hard time functioning without you, right? When do you push the baby bird out of the nest? When is it safe to do that? And so that is a tricky one. And if you think about your path as a leader, the training others to lead is the hardest part. Particularly when you work so hard to get to the front of the room and you want to be the person that makes the decisions and is kind of that focal point. People come to me, right? That's a natural thing we want, potentially. It's hard to step away and to cede control to another individual. And so that takes a lot of focus, attention, and effort to be successful at. And so it's good to break that down. As I mentioned, we also want to talk about followership a little bit. And again, that's the practice of how we actually function when we're in the room. We're reporting through someone else. And it doesn't get as much attention, obviously, as leadership. And I think that is a bit of a shame. Most of us will have some intrinsic knowledge of this, of how we support the organization, but closely examining it and thinking about it is important to understand how we function ourselves and what we want to cultivate in the people that will report to us. And so focusing a bit on followership helps us be better leaders and better operators in an organization, right? And so we think about followership from a definition standpoint. It's the process of contributing to goals and achieving a shared vision under the direction of a leader, right? I'm not in charge, but I'm doing everything I can to paddle in the same direction on this boat and to encourage my other followers to paddle in the same direction on the boat so we get to where we want to go. Both leaders and followers are needed in an organization, a team, a movement. If you have no one to lead, if you have no followers, you're not a leader, right? You may be a standout, might be a martyr, but you're not a leader. And so you have to have those followers with you. I will not show it in this session, but I'll give you maybe a recommendation for viewing. If you look at Simon Sinek's How to Make a Movement, he does this really interesting discussion about it's really the third person to join a movement that is the most important. And he uses this example of a group dancing at a festival, and one person's dancing by themselves for a while, and everyone's just watching in the middle of the field by themselves. Then another person comes up and they start dancing, right? Still nothing changes. The third person that joins, and all of a sudden it's a movement. The place floods with other people dancing, right? It's this psychological acceptance that it's okay for us to participate, right? Followers are important. You can be at the front doing the amazing thing, but you have to have the people that believe in you and follow you. And so those little followers are just as important. If you discredit that as a leader, you will not be effective. And if you don't actively engage with the leaders you believe in and support them, they will not be effective. And so not that you have to blindly follow anybody that's assigned as your leader, but if you believe in somebody, you owe it to them to try to work to be a good follower. It's important to note that an individual's role changes depending on the situation in the group or over time. And so you may start out as a follower and you may become the leader over time. You also may be in a situation where you are starting out as the leader and you become a follower over time, depending on the situation, the context, the task at hand. And that's sometimes a bit of an ego check, but it's okay, especially in informal settings where you recognize I'm not the expert on this content and someone else should lead, and I should be a good follower. That's also a great moment where you can effectively practice leading from the back of a room, where I'm going to step into the follower role, even if I have the high expertise, because this is a moment where someone that I believe in can shine. And I don't need to take on this task, this leadership role right now. And so how do you empower others in those moments? It can change. And again, some of those really strong leaders can then become really strong followers supporting other people's growth. Strong followers are often the informal leader of a group. I kind of hinted this earlier. But if you think about a work setting you may have been in where you're not directly in charge, but people look to you as a person who has authority, right? You're likely a really good follower in that moment, unless you have a toxic environment that folks are like, I'm checking out of the leader we have and investing in this informal leader. A lot of times it's that person that when the leader walks out of the room and gives the autonomy, you look for the next in charge, right? Who is the most senior, most knowledgeable, has the highest aptitude. That informal leader is probably the strongest follower. And then finally, it's important to note that a great leader is not always a great follower, and that can lead to conflict, right? Really, no one is a leader at everything. Even if you think about folks at the highest levels of authority, they have someone else they report to or act in a leadership or a followership capacity with, right? President Wilson of our institution. He's a leader of our institution. She reports through the board and the UT system, right? And so she's a leader here, and she may be a leader in the room amongst her UT peers, but she's not in charge of the system, right? And so she has to be a good follower in those settings. Sometimes folks really struggle to step out of their leadership shoes and be the good follower. And so by examining followership and the important steps there, we can be better at this. I'd encourage you to think about this next time you're in a followership situation of, am I contributing the way I want to towards us being successful here? And again, that does not ever mean blindly follow the leader in front just because they're the leader, right? If someone is not doing things ethically or correctly, it's okay to challenge to the point of where you have professional and personal safety to do so, right? I would not advocate for blindly following, but I do advocate for being strong followers in good situations. Any questions about this one? Gone through a good amount already, right? Okay. Couple of things of how you can exhibit strong followership. Some tangible things you can do. Embody the positive team player mentality, right? A lot of times when you have situations where a team situation gets difficult, a work situation gets difficult, folks can become toxic, and it's easy to be in the negative. And so trying to be the positive, the team player as much as possible and bringing folks forward, even when it's seeking change, right? How are you being a team player and seeking change for the better? Trying to believe as much as you can in the organization. Now, that doesn't mean let people take advantage of you as the team player, but it is important to be a team player. Take direction and deliver feedback well. Those go in tandem. If you are a good leader, you will seek and you will value feedback from your followers. If you are a strong follower, you will provide good feedback to your leader and potentially help them avoid mistakes, right? If a leader is heading towards a cliff, stop them from running off the cliff as much as you can, right? That's being a good follower, right? Because everybody has intelligence. Everyone can assist with that. The leader isn't the person with omnipotence, right? But take the direction as well, right? You may disagree with a direction or a task or a process, right? Say your piece, talk with the supervisor or the leader. And if they have a good rationale on why it should be done a certain way, and you've had your moment to talk about it, and you're not doing anything unethical or unsafe, follow through with what you've been asked to do, right? If it doesn't change. Be supportive of the growth of your peers, right? When one person wins, we all win. So don't become ultra competitive that I have to hold other people down so that I'm the most successful. Invest in your own professional growth and autonomy, right? The best followers are the ones that are constantly trying to improve themselves, to get better, to not stagnate. And so they're actually investing in the idea that someday I will not be the follower. And that makes you stronger. Develop competency, expertise, and institutional knowledge, right? And those are really three different things. They may feel similar, but when I say develop competency, right, there may be tasks that you're not great at, but you need to have a level of competency to do them. You can be relied upon to do it. You may have tasks that you are naturally excited about and better at. Develop your expertise there, so you're the go-to person. And then develop your institutional knowledge so you know things that when the question comes up, leaders can't know everything and they rely on their team to have additional knowledge. And so if the question comes up, leaders know the answer, you can help out. So everybody shares that burden. So those are three actually very different things. The competency, I can handle that one task. Not my great thing, but I can do it. My expertise, if you need it done, you come to me. And my institutional knowledge, I can cover gaps. So develop those three things. And then suggest ideas and solutions, but be okay with running with the ideas and solutions of the team, right? When you're talking about brainstorming about how you can approach an objective, offer your feedback, offer your ideas, but if the team moves in a different direction, support it. Again, as long as nobody's doing anything unsafe or unethical, if your idea isn't the one chosen, you can't just fold your arms and shut down. You're not being a positive follower. You got to buy in that the team decided to move in a different direction and you support it 100%. I've often described this and I talk to folks that, in a closed door meeting, where you're meeting with the supervisor and the team, you have a concern, everyone can voice that concern and fight about it and work through it. But once you leave the room, you're all on the same page and you move forward one voice. Cool. Excellent. So now we're actually going to move from the conversational piece to the rubber meets the road, working on our leadership philosophy. And I'm going to drop this in the chat so Edgar and folks have access to it as well. But I have a worksheet that we can use to go along with this. Folks over in the digital space should now be able to access this leadership philosophy worksheet. We're going to actually break it down in the slides too, but I have copies for our folks in the room. This is where I'd love for the session to get a bit more interactive as we're thinking about these and kind of talking through as a group. And so folks online can come off mute as well and offer their feedback as we do this. We're going to start with kind of some continua that break down some of the different aspects of leadership that we've discussed elsewhere. We kind of have these long dialogues about it. So now we're thinking about ourselves in the moment. How do you describe leadership, right? Our first question. And so don't take a ton of time on these questions. We go through them. It's really think about it for a second or two, circle your answer. Where does this fall for you in the importance? And then we'll talk about each one. And so the first one is, how do you describe, sorry, got to make the portion appear on the continuum. When you describe leadership, and how would you assign the importance of task completion? On the one hand, 10, it's very, very important. On the other hand, task completion is not at all important. So on a scale at 1 to 10, in the worksheet in front of you, how important in leadership is focusing on task completion? Again, if, better describe this, maybe if you're thinking about how a leader would lead you, they're focused on making sure tasks get done. How important is that? Take a second, think about it, circle. There's no wrong answer here. If you're agonizing over it, that's okay. You can circle in the middle between boxes. There's no test. No one's being late. Edgar, what did you put?
I put very important.
10 all the way at the end?
Yes, 10.
All right. Edgar, for him, it's very important the leader focuses on task completion. Folks in the room, what did you put?
8.
8? Okay. Still very, very important.
For me, I'm between 8 or 9, so maybe 8.5.
Gotcha. Excellent. Good. This is interesting. So for me, I'm more in a 6.5 to a 7 for task completion, right? And again, no wrong answers here, right? So I'm thinking about leadership. For me, yep, the leader at the end of the day has to make sure people are getting their work done. But my hope is the followers are actually doing that for me, right? I don't need to focus on the fact that you did it. I need to focus on everything else. So I think it was a big picture, but there's no wrong answer on this, and where you're at in your leadership journey may dictate how important this needs to be for you. Next one. Subordinate autonomy. The ability for the folks that report to you to make their own decisions, to work independently, to have agency. How important is that in leadership for you? We'll go the other way this time. What'd you put?
I did a 6.
A 6. Okay. America, what'd you put?
For this one, I think I'm more like an 8.
An 8. Okay, good. Edgar, what you got for this one?
I say the same, 8.
8? Okay. Anyone want to talk about why? You were at a 6. Tell me more about that.
Because I feel it depends. So if the project or whatever the thing is very specific, the subordinates cannot have that much autonomy.
Sure.
But in general, I feel like 6 is a good in between. Like they have a little more autonomy, rather than not.
Excellent. Good. Thank you. And if other folks want to share anything about their answers, please feel free. We'll get at least one response on each one. That would be for me, for the group. But if you have other thoughts or want to deconstruct anything, let me know. We definitely can. All right, so where do you put growth and development of your subordinates on this continuum from very important to not at all important? Keep changing our order. I'm gonna have you go first, Edgar.
That's very important for me, so that will be probably a 10.
A 10. All right. That's okay. Edgar's answer should not influence yours.
I did 9.
A 9.
For me, I think more like 7 or 8.
7 or 8. Okay.
I'm always in between.
Yeah. For me, I put this one at a 10. And again, everyone has their own rationale for this. America, you were a bit of the outlier on this one. Why is this one a little bit lower for you?
Well, I think it is important as far as, well, like you mentioned, being able to have someone else be the successor in a future role. But at the same time, I think that if you reached a certain, well, we're kind of consistently learning and growing, right, with time, with different experiences. But I think that for a certain point or for a couple of years, it may be at the same spot where you don't necessarily get anything new.
Sure.
So it may not be consistent for development, but that doesn't mean that you're not actually.
Yeah.
If you don't see it in the moment.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making.
No, I get it. Yeah. It depends on level and the person's growth and again, the time frame. No, it's good. That is interesting. I think for me, I put it at 10, but it's probably not a mystery or a shock that I put the growth and development of folks, the subordinates at a 10. I pushed out a leadership seminar with graduate students, so yeah, makes sense. But no, this all is okay. And again, as you're working through this, it's going to help frame how you're defining leadership for your own philosophy, right? And what you value. What are you going to speak about in your so? And again, not everything can be very important. Everything is very important. Nothing is. Call it the syndrome theory. Relationship with your subordinates, right? How positive a working relationship you have with your subordinates. When you describe leadership, is that very important? Not at all important? Where does it fall in your continuum? Take a second, think about it. We'll go around again. I think America, you're up first on this one.
Okay, gotcha. I would say an 8 for me.
We're at an 8?
10.
At a 10?
Yeah.
All right. Edgar, where are you at with this one?
9.
A 9. All right. Edgar, why is this one a 9 for you?
Because I think having a relationship with subordinates, it's influential in getting things done, but also learn from it. Depending on the feedback that you receive, right? If you trust your leader, I'm gonna do my best to do for the future based on the feedback. But if I don't have a good relationship with my leader, then probably I will lack of development or lose interest on develop myself. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing your context on that. It does not surprise me you value the relationship with subordinates very high, given our conversations and then work with you and your previous work. I know that you're a very relationship focused person, so it doesn't surprise me at all. I'm glad you shared that perspective with us. Again, this is an interesting one too, because depending on how you're leading or who you're leading, this may become inconsequential, right? It's very transitional, very transactional, right? But does it ever feel good? No, usually doesn't. Harmony in the workplace or in the group. How well everyone's getting along, right? Lack of conflict. How important is that harmony? Which also means lack of competition, potentially.
So this one is everyone, not just leader and subordinate.
Well, the harmony in the workplace is really more about how your team coexists together, not necessarily they work with you, because that's a relationship question.
Right.
But harmony is how well everyone else is getting along. How important is that to you when you describe a leader?
I would say a 10.
I can all jump in at a 10, all right?
Me too, a 10.
A 10,
For me, between 8 or 9.
8 or a
Maybe
9.
leaning more towards 8.
Okay,
I would say the same as I did the same for the relationship with subordinates and the harmony
sure.
in the workplace. So I think it goes all around whatever relationship or influence or perspective of a leader that may impact someone's performance, but also within the team, if someone's not getting along,
Sure.
they may not be able to complete their tasks if they need to work with someone else.
True. Yeah, if you don't have folks that can work together effectively, if there's active conflict, that can be detrimental. I would counterpoint, not that I would necessarily place this on the not at all important or low category. Sometimes workplace competition is beneficial depending on the setting. I've also definitely seen leaders that they really look at the workplace or the organization as, as a job, a place to come in and take care of whatever business it is, even if it's not actually a workplace, right? And then how well everyone gets along is inconsequential, right? They see that as the extra. And so it's nice if we have it, but at the end of the day, the task completion is most important. So it's interesting that this group was, task completion is very important,
Mhm.
but harmony also very important, right? Because those things sometimes can be at odds. You'll sometimes see leaders where it's like, I invest all of my time into the making sure everyone gets along, but the task completion suffers. And so is there a trade-off there? I'd argue that doesn't always have to be, but there's sometimes you see that very commonly in leadership situations. All right. Positional power and authority. How important is the positional power and authority? So the person who is leading, having that strong authority, the delegation, the decision-making, right? The power is vested in them as the leader and the individual. How important is that in a leader? Would you like to go first on this one?
Yes, I did a 7.
A 7. All right, cool. America?
I was also thinking of 7.
A 7.
Sounds good.
Edgar?
I would say 8.
8. Interesting. Got it. This is an interesting one for me because I actually put this one at about a 4 for myself. I strongly value the informal leadership and the essentially drawing your authority from the work that you do and how you lead versus the title that you receive, right? However, it is important to necessarily have the requisite title. Sometimes it goes with it so that you are recognized as a leader. So anyone want to jump in on their thoughts on this one? Love to hear.
Well, I said 7 because it's important, because I agree with the informal type of leadership,
Mhm.
but also in my case, I would like to have the power so that subordinates actually listen when
Yeah.
I say something. Like,
It's a good
yeah, put me like at the top.
Yeah, that's important occasionally. So if you are in a situation where folks are challenged regularly or you're new in a role, that positional authority can sometimes be much more important in establishing, like, yep, I'm the leader, this is what we're doing, right? It's really situational. Okay, good. So before we actually jump to number 2, I do want you to take a look at your breakdown, right? And where you're at on the continuum and what you circled, right? Again, as I shared, everything is ultra important. It's hard to articulate that anything, one thing is very important. And so as you go through and articulate this, I think it's also helpful to reflect back when you think after the session, if I'm now ranking these now, what are the top 3? What are the bottom 3? As far as the things that are really important. This is where I'm going to focus. So if you think about now, I'm crafting my leadership philosophy. All of these things can't be my focus. So what are the things that are truly most important to me when leading? These are all tools in the toolbox that you may use, but what are the most important for you, right? You may find that the most important thing for you is task completion, harmony in the workforce, and positional authority. With those three things, I can be an effective leader, right? I have the effective title that allows me to delegate and assign tasks. I make sure everyone gets along well and organizes their stuff as a team, and I make sure stuff gets done, right? And because of that, we're a high-performing team. They listen to me without question, they all get along, and we get our stuff done. Those could be your three important things. And if you think about how I articulate that philosophy, in a really quick order, I've been able to establish that in an interview. Yeah? So I want you to think about and reflect on that in the future. The next, again, thinking about our guiding question, how do you describe yourself as a leader? So now we try to do kind of a values assessment about leadership. I have to think about you, right? And so I want you to take just a moment and list 3 to 5 adjectives that describe your leadership. And then I want you to answer the question, the subordinates I lead receive blank. Whatever it is, if someone is reporting through you informally or formally, what are they receiving by being led by you? And then as a leader, I aspire to do what? What is that? Just take 2 minutes on this. Doesn't have to be perfect. Put what comes to mind, and then we'll share back. All right, let's share these back. Edgar, why don't you go first? Give me your 3 to 5 adjectives, what your subordinates, and read the phrase, subordinates I lead receive blank, and leaders I aspire to are blank.
For the subordinates I lead, receive trust, work ethic, and what else? Ownership.
Excellent. And what are your 3 to 5 adjectives? If you got it.
Leaders I aspire to, I don't want to sound mean, but educate.
Yeah, that's all right.
Uplift others,
Okay,
and again, be an example.
excellent. Awesome. Thank you. What's the next? Give me your 3 to 5, and then your 2 statements.
Okay.
Go for
My adjectives are attentive, effective, and supportive. Subordinates I lead receive support and guidance. And leaders I aspire to also be a role model, their example, and to influence them toward success.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so for my adjectives, I would describe my leadership as disciplined. I definitely did take my strengths finder strengths, but that really is how I would describe my leadership. It would be disciplined, deliberative, achieving, and flexible. So I really need things to be organized or have a certain structure. But I'm also very careful when making decisions. I like to weigh out all of the options. And I just like to be able to see that things get done and that we're moving towards a goal that hopefully benefits someone else, not just the group itself. And even though I prefer to have something like more structured, if there's anything that happens just unexpectedly, it is tedious and a little bit annoying, but we can do that adapting quickly. And then for the subordinates I lead receive support and encouragement. I would say that was a big one for me. And I wasn't sure what to put for the last one. The leaders I aspire to.
Yeah, I think my brain was moving in 2 different directions when I wrote that and didn't catch it. because you could read that in two different, and I read it actually differently when I announced it to you all, and then it reads differently, because you could either put leaders, like actual individuals you aspire to be like, or like as leader, I aspire to. I think I was in my brain moving in two different directions and missed that, but how did you answer it?
When I read it, I thought it was more of thinking of role models
Sure.
already
And who would that be for you?
existing. And for me, oh man, that's pretty tough.
Yeah,
What would you say?
for you? I don't
No, for
know.
you, no, for you.
Yeah.
For you.
No, that's interesting. So for leaders that I would aspire to, there's a couple, and I take chunks of people's leadership styles and things that I've really valued over time. And it's interesting, they're all supervisors, right? My current supervisor, the assistant dean, I really appreciate her empathy and the manner in which she leads and the care with which she leads, right? She's so genuine about how she approaches that. And there's no gamesmanship in her leadership. And I really appreciate that authenticity. In a former supervisor, actually works in an institution, actually in a different role, works in transportation. I really appreciated that in the individual's ability to navigate an institution of higher education, network with individuals, and essentially move through processes. His ability to generate institutional knowledge and be a key player no matter where he is amazing. And so I really appreciate that about Mr. Krause. And then the final one is a former supervisor works in diversity, equity, and inclusion in Wisconsin. And I really appreciated this person's just frank and earnest commitment to what she did and her values. Like, she's the type of individual, and I watched her actually do this in a department where the department wasn't meeting her values, and she walked. That's it. And you can always think about doing that, but her ability to be like, I do not agree with the values of this organization, and so I'm out. That level of commitment, I admire so deeply. And so those are three individuals that I'd aspire to. The genuineness, the empathy, the ability to navigate a professional environment, and the ability to just stick to your guns so strongly. So that's my answer on that. And if you're sitting here trying to reflect, it doesn't have to be an ultra famous person. And it doesn't have to be there's one leader I'm going to emulate everything about. This is a good illustrative example. You can find there are bits and pieces of leaders like, I really appreciate this facet. This is important to me. I want to emulate that, right? I'll share mine as well to continue as a group. So my 3 to 5 adjectives, my 3 adjectives, I am dependable, caring, and growth focused. Would be mine. Subordinates I lead receive a strong emphasis on their own growth and development and mentorship for their own leadership. And I put that, like, if you think about it, I write a cover letter about how I'm going to supervise people. I put that kind of mindset in the cover letter that people I supervise, I'm going to invest in them, right? I think it's important. And so for me, that is what they receive from me when I supervise folks, or at least I hope to. If I think about what I aspire to do in my leaders and my followers, I aspire to be the leader that motivates and encourages that growth, and that folks feel like they're getting that from me. All right, so now we know kind of what are our things that are important to us. We know how we describe ourselves, right? We're going to take the interview question. We're going to put that in our back pocket, right, as the actual last one. And we're going to take now 2 minutes to answer these next questions. And that is, how do you actually lead, right? It's okay to talk about how you view yourself, right? What do you value? How do you describe yourself? What do people receive? But really actually thinking about, if I put myself in a context of thinking about a time I've actually led, did I do all the things I say I do or want to do, right? And so I always think about how you actually lead. So as much as possible, reflecting on our previous conversations, think about, are there leadership approaches, theories, or models that you would apply in a one-on-one and in a group, a team setting? If you aren't there yet, that's okay. But if you're remembering, I'm like, yep, you know what? Transformational leadership and contingency theory, that's my jam, right? Write it down. If you're not there yet, that's okay. So think about those things for just a minute, and then think about When I lead, decisions are made, and then there's, again, kind of a continuum. By my subordinates with direction by me, by my subordinates with input and approval from the leader, by me with input from my subordinates, or by me without input from my subordinates. So think about the leadership philosophies you may want to adopt in decision-making. I'll give us 1 minute for this one on the clock. This is a little, still reflective, but not as much writing, right? So think about this. When you're actually in a leadership situation, what do you do?
What are the different models I didn't come to the last session? So
Yeah, the different models. So the models that we discussed contingency theory, situational theory. We talked about path goal theory. And then in our most recent session, we talked about transformational theory and leader-member exchange. We briefly talked about servant-based leadership, I believe, in the reference hill, but we didn't go in depth on that. And if you are not quite sure what your theories and approaches are right now, that's okay.
okay.
The answer could be, I'm still exploring this, right? But if you have one, you're like, yep, this is what I want. Feel free to put that down.
Okay.
For this one, I'll actually start and share with you all, and then to give it a little bit of a model way approach to this, and then we'll hear from the group. And so, and this is something I would talk about in an interview, right? My leadership philosophy in a one-to-one setting, right? So my direct interaction with someone, I use situational theory, right? If you recall, situational theory is the one where you have the 4 quadrants that dictate based on someone's ability and engagement, it dictates how you supervise them, right? So when I'm in a one-on-one situation with someone, I use situational theory to help them figure out how committed are they to what we're doing, how knowledgeable are what they're doing, and what does that mean I need to do from a supervisory standpoint, right? They are ultra committed, they are ultra knowledgeable, just give them the autonomy and let them go, right? They don't need anything from me. They are really excited to be here, they have very little knowledge. But you keep them close and coach them because I want to nurture that excitement and build the knowledge, right? So I use that in my one-on-one situations, situational leadership. When I'm thinking about my team approach, I try my best to practice transformational leadership, which is a process by which I'm building consensus and excitement and a shared vision so everyone buys in and becomes leaders in their own right. And so I have a relationship-focused one, and I have a very tangible, model-y focused one that I use. When I lead, decisions are made, usually somewhere in between by my subordinates with my input and approval, or with me with my input from my subordinates, right? Depends on the situation, right? Sometimes I have to make the decision, but I always take into account what their thoughts and feelings are. And sometimes I let them know, tell me what you want to do. Come talk to me, make sure we're okay with it. But as long as you make a well-reasoned plan, I'll let you run with it. I try to trend much more towards the come give me your plan and I'll sign off on it, than I have to be, let me talk about it with you, and then I'll take into consideration, make a decision. So I fall somewhere in there. But if I have my preference, it's with my input and my approval, subordinates can move forward. So, anyone want to offer up their theories or their conversation around that and how they make decisions?
I agree with what you said on the one-to-one, so I think I would also do situational.
Okay,
Total team, exploring,
sure.
and then decisions, when I lead, decisions are made also by my subordinates with my input.
Excellent. Thank you. Edgar, what you got?
I'm almost the same. I agree with the 2 first ones.
Yeah.
With situational leadership. In the third one, I think it's almost the same because I think when I lead, decisions are made by my subordinates with my approval and with the intention to give them some control of decisions. And if we screw up, if we make mistakes, we can learn from it altogether, right? Not just from me, but also learn from their own mistakes, the things that we didn't look, and they can grow as leaders for the future as well, based on that.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you. America, what you got?
For me, for my one-on-one, I would also say the situational theory. I'm very well aware of everyone's strengths and weaknesses, and I know how to approach someone or how to address them. Or how to frame something when delegating a task.
Right.
And for the team leadership, maybe the leader exchange.
Do you remember exchange?
Member exchange.
All right.
And then when I lead, decisions are made. It would also depend on the situation, but it would be either subordinates with my input and feedback, or by me with input from everyone. But as Jesse mentioned, I always like to ask for feedback or see what everyone thinks, and then try to figure out what would be the best given my input and everyone else's.
Cool. Thank you. And thanks everybody for sharing on this. I think again, as you're reflecting on it and maybe pick some theories, start exploring those. Make sure they still really feel like they line up for you. I know that you don't have to only just use one, right? It's if you like the tangibility and the kind of I can touch it, the model of situational theory. And it's I know exactly where I'm at in these 4 quadrants, really easily understandable. Run with it, but you can also take pieces of that and apply it elsewhere. Same thing with your other theory for your large group, right? And we only covered a small snippet of potential theories and approaches in our sessions, because even though we did several sessions, there's a lot of scholarship around this. So use this potentially as a springboard to explore a bit more. I often reference servant-based leadership as another really fascinating style of leadership that you can explore. So like, find it out there. If you're not finding these that really ring true with you, as you review our materials, you think about it, research what does. Again, my goal is that as we finish this, sessions, and you move through this process, that when someone asks you that last question, how do you lead in an interview? You will cite a theory or an approach. You'll say, I practice this style of theory and this style of theory. This is what I do. This is how I do it, practical application, and this is why I do it, your value statements. And the people that I supervise and lead receive this from me because I do it that way. Right? And that is your leadership philosophy, right? When you put all those pieces together, you reflect on this worksheet, you kind of do the homework and the reflection, that gives you that leadership philosophy. And that doesn't just answer the interview question for you. That gives you guidance of how you actually act in those leadership situations. It makes you more effective. It allows you to lead people better and get better results over time. And it makes you a better follower. And so my hope is, as we go through this whole process together, that this will lead you towards that next step on the journey. So I'll answer any questions or thoughts that we have. I'm actually going to move forward just a slide and then move back in the interest of time. But I do always want to talk about what comes next in this. Now, this is our final session for the year in leadership. There are still opportunities for you to explore leadership in the future. And so I encourage you to seek out that professional mentor. I say this every time, seek out a professional mentor, someone that you can use to both aspire to and bounce ideas off of. Think about attending a StrengthsFinder session through UPEP. Those are great ways to explore leadership. Look to the SCLC leadership events. You can find more things related to leadership, and you can explore, maybe even walk in the room and be the person who's most knowledgeable about leadership in the room and talk about theory. That would be really great. Locate articles for further reading regarding theories, approaches, or models that resonate with you the most. And so if you wrote situational leadership, I want you to read about situational leadership. Learn more about it than the brief things we've talked about. If you haven't identified another form or you're still looking, find those different leadership theories, take it to the next step, and draft up your philosophy into a full-fledged statement. You have the worksheet now. Write it and then amend that statement and that approach as your understanding develops over time, because you are not fully formed, finished. We never are. And so as you develop, give yourself the freedom and the grace to change and change your approach. So I appreciate you again for being here.